Hi everyone, I'm Shivangi Jain and we welcome you to the Start of India webinar on rebooting the economy with the new normal. We know that with the COVID-19 pandemic, the new normal is going to be very different. There are conjectures around it. Today's panel discussion focuses on sharing the best practices and strategies adopted by a few very agile and most innovative businesses that have been closely working with the startups as well. So we've got a special panel of experts on board for you today. I welcome Mr. William Blair, Vice President and Chief Executive from Lockheed Martin India Private Limited. Mr. Rohit Girdhar, Vice President, Strategy, Mergers and Acquisitions from Infineon Technologies Asia Pacific. And Ms. Shruti Kannan, Head Cisco Launchpad. Thank you so much, everyone, and we welcome each one of you. For the benefit of the larger audience, I'll give you a brief introduction of each of our panelists. William joined Lockheed Martin as VP and Chief Executive in October 2019. In this capacity, he's responsible for leading and developing Lockheed Martin's corporation strategy for India and serve as executive representative for Lockheed Martin programs, products, and services in the country. This is his third appointment in India with multinational aerospace and defense company. As a part of his previous roles at Lockheed, he has led and developed strategic partnerships to advance space capabilities and services with customers and strategic partners in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Israel. Prior to joining Lockheed Martin, Mr. Blair has served over 25 years in a variety of senior roles with defense and aerospace companies, including Raytheon Company and GE Aviation. Mr. Blair also holds a master's degree in mechanical engineering from MIT. He's also a certified master black belt in Lean Six Sigma. While Rohit is a part of Infineon's Asia Pacific regional leadership team and works on strategic assignments for Infineon's legal entities in Asia Pacific region, for example, India, ASEAN, Korea, and Australia. He started his professional career at Teradyne, California in 1998 as an engineer and product manager. Between 2003 and 2004, he was employed at GE Bangalore. In 2005, he joined Infineon Technologies in Singapore, Infineon being Europe's largest semiconductor company. Rohit holds bachelor's degree from BITS Pilani, a master's degree from Stanford University, as well as MBA from INSEAD. Shruti heads Cisco Launchpad, where she works with deep tech startups for co-creating end-to-end digital solutions, focusing on technology areas like IoT, collaboration, security, network, and infra, analytics, etc. Through Launchpad, she drives meaningful outcomes for startups in their scale-up journey by providing access to a wide range of resources, including joint go-to-market, tech integrations, business mentorship, grants, and investor connects. Over the last 3 years, she's worked closely with over 100 CXOs of deep tech startups as well as mentors across various organizations. Prior to Cisco Launchpad, she spearheaded customer success for Tier 1 telecom providers, deploying mobility solutions around the world. We are extremely delighted to have all of you on board. Today's session will start with 10 to 15 minutes presentation by each of the panelists on the strategies adopted by them during this time, touch base on changes in the innovation ecosystem, and sharing best practices and suggestive strategies for startups. This will be followed by an open panel discussion where we'll invite questions from our audience. We're very excited to hear from you. I would request Mr. William to share his thoughts, please.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me okay, Shivangi?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. No, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it. And I was going to see if Gautam can share the slides because I think it'd be more effective if he's sharing from that side. And I appreciate the introduction. I've been with Lockheed Martin now a couple of years. And is that the first slide? Is that the first slide, Gautam? Yeah, thank you. So, I was just going to go through, maybe I'll take about 10 minutes. I'll try to stay within for 15 for sure, just to share with you, just a quick introduction as to who we are, Lockheed Martin in India, how we've been engaging Indian startups, and then in the context of broadly, but also promoting aerospace and defense ecosystem expansion, And lastly, I'll just touch on kind of the new reality that we're operating in the current, and then what we anticipate from a post-COVID environment. If you could go to the next slide, please. Just quick intro to who are we. We're essentially, one of the largest defense and aerospace companies in the world. And we're made up by 4 business areas. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is to give you a perspective of each one of those focus areas in which we seek to engage startup companies across the globe. And so we're probably most well known for the aeronautics business, and you see the F-35 there, so tactical fighters. We're competing for the upcoming fighter competition in India. That's a key opportunity for us. Below that, you can see the helicopters, the rotary and mission systems business. We were recently selected for the MH-60 Romeo and are competing for some of the strategic partner programs, the Navy utility helicopter. And again, that's creating opportunities for us to engage with startups. In the top right, the missiles and fire control. We've got essentially the fire control system on the Apache helicopters, as well as tactical missiles. So the Hellfire missile as an example, and promoting Javelin anti-tank guided missile for India's requirement. And then on the bottom is space systems. Space systems is the business area I came from most recently. It's really impressive, and almost anything that we do with NASA or globally, whether it's space exploration or human space flight, and then also the strategic and defensive capacities. In every area, we're engaging new startups, and it's probably one of the most productive areas from a new startup domain, if you will, that we've been both engaging as well as seeing a lot of growth. If you could go to the next slide, please, Gautam. We're a relatively large company, and so with over 49,000 scientists and engineers. And the picture there you see on the bottom left is our advanced technology center for the space business in Palo Alto, California. We have a large company, a lot of talent, but we also need to, through our technology centers and also through our engagements with strategic partners and startup companies, we really need that kind of that broader talent, if you will, to accomplish the mission that our customer requires, as well as to drive new innovations, new growth, new ways of meeting customer mission requirements. Next slide, please. And so the focus areas, just to give you some perspective, because this is indicative of those areas where we seek to engage with startup companies. So from a strategic and enabling perspective, I'd highlight autonomy and robotics. So when we're looking at machine learning and automation and kind of more in the intelligence space, that's a key focus for us. And we found a lot of opportunities working with startups in India. Sensors and exploitation, cybersecurity, signals and communication. I mean, those are all areas where there are both niche and other capabilities that are being developed globally. On the enabling technologies front, there's a startup we were working with on nanomaterials as an example, which I'll talk about later. But those are key enabling technologies. And when I look at this in terms of the aerospace and defense ecosystem in India, and really our focus and interest to work with startups, it's some of these key areas that I think can truly differentiate India going forward, both to meet the Indian requirements, but also the global requirements. Next slide, please. We're based in New Delhi in terms of our headquarters. We have significant operations in Hyderabad, and in the green are the Air Force bases where we're supporting the Indian Air Force customer with the C-130s, as well as the Apache helicopter is a Boeing platform, but has a significant content of Lockheed Martin systems, as well as missile capabilities. So just to give you a perspective of how we're placed, in Hyderabad, we're partnered with Tata through two joint ventures that are now 10 years old. we have a very diverse aerospace and defense ecosystem, from large companies all the way down to new startups that are feeding into that supply chain and strategic partner domain in both the aerostructures and the aerospace JV for helicopters. Next slide, please. So, we've really tried to take an innovative approach to sourcing. So we're globally scouting out new technologies, small business innovations, and working with smaller labs to pilot new opportunities. In the center, you see LM Ventures. That's a venture fund that we have that effectively can invest in new and small startups. And those are some specific opportunities we're seeking in India. And then on the right-hand side is more of the incubating and mentoring. We, through open entrepreneurial challenges, are finding ways to basically innovate in a more strategic and, I'll just say, smaller basis. So being a very large company challenges us as to how can we, bring the spirit of entrepreneurial and startup mindset and into a way we can develop new aircraft systems, capabilities. And we're trying to do that through these types of entrepreneurial challenges, which is through universities and startup operations like Startup India. Next slide, please. And so what we're doing in India is we call it the India Innovation Growth Program. We kicked it off in 2007. We've created over 400 business agreements, provided seed funding to offer support for startup growth, and in effect, through working with all these startups and entrepreneurs, generated over $1 billion worth of turnover through those companies, and really providing a marketplace access. So we've been talking to a lot of, and we do this in partnership with the Department of Science and Technology and Tata Trusts. And really, it's a way for us, I think, to best engage the startup ecosystem and find a way to translate that also to new business opportunities, ultimately help the business case be created for the startups, and find ways where some of these, not all, but some of these may be in the defense and aerospace ecosystem, find ways to get them integrated into our supply chain. So it's a combination of incubating, mentoring, and also trying to find a way to help facilitate those startups' business case through engagement and connecting into the business areas that I introduced you to in the first or second slide. Next slide, please, Gautam. And this is just a few examples where we have basically both cultivated and then integrated indigenous content into global platforms. And you can see on the bottom right, Nopo Nanotechnologies from Bangalore, really truly innovative, cutting edge nanomaterial technology capability. And we're looking to see how we can integrate that into our most advanced aircraft applications. And so these are cases where, through the India Innovation Growth Program I just introduced you to on the prior slide, are finding ways to incubate, engage, and then find, through those connections that we develop, where we can connect them into our supply chain. Next slide, please. And so lastly, that gives you a perspective for how we're engaging startups. I'm happy to address any questions that you have. This is my last slide, just to make sure I can give some time back to you all from a Q&A perspective. In talking with the Startup India team, I thought it was appropriate also to just talk about how we're approaching COVID. And I'll tell you, it's a huge challenge. I know we're all feeling it. And first and foremost, you can see in the top of the page what our company, and really what our chairman and CEO, Marilyn Hewson, has cited, that, first and foremost, will protect the health and safety of the men and women on the job and their families within Lockheed Martin. I know we're all of the same mindset because of the scenario that we're in. And then secondly, we'll continue to perform and deliver for our customers for national, really global security, global communications, and infrastructure. because we're partners. We're partners with all our customers. Take the Indian Air Force. It's critical at this time in supporting the operations of the C-130J that's being employed in diverse applications, and now in a more humanitarian assistance. That now more than ever, as always, we maintain the security but also the capabilities. And then third, we do our part with know-how, resources, and leadership to assist the communities in our country. We had kicked off with Startup India about a month ago, and over the last several weeks been engaging startups in India to find out where are those opportunities for startups that are coming up with new and innovative ideas to deal with the COVID crisis, whether it's the ability to facilitate how we get back to work, address new solutions to deal with the crisis. And we're making those then connections into the rest of our companies and headquarters so we can exchange those ideas from a interface back with our headquarters businesses. And so we see several opportunities where we can either fund, pilot, or engage, or just broker relationships of startups with other companies or with governments that may be able to also leverage some really new and innovative ideas that were, I think, incubated or identified through those engagements. And the bottom, as a company, we're also accelerating payments to our suppliers as well as orders. That's very much in the U.S. under the DoD mandate, but also true in India. And I mention that because it's the MSMEs, it's the new startups that truly need to have a reliable level of income at a time when you could say that we're on a bit of a pause in terms of our ability to meet our production requirements, which is transitioning. And so I mentioned the third item there on how we're engaging startups. I think that's just the kind of the tip of the iceberg of what is a much bigger opportunity for us, because I think, and I'll close on this, that because of how we're operating remotely, we're actually having to operate differently. We're not paced by getting someone on an airplane, flying into India, putting on a big seminar, and then having follow-up over a period of weeks. What's, I think, happened over a period of weeks or months is now occurring week to week through these types of virtual engagements. And so we very much want to further explore that. I think actually it gives startups like many of you that are watching this actually a tremendous edge, because it's not so dependent on the infrastructure and the investment. It's really, frankly, more dependent on the big ideas and how you can get them in a way crowdsourced or crowd aware, such that we get the level of engagement and connections that are going to translate an idea to a real application. So with that, I'll close and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, William. We'll take it forward from there that virtual is going to be the new normal. And it's actually great to hear about the collaborative approach that you've been taking with your partners, your customers, and of course, different organizations to work with the startups also very closely. I would now request Rohit to please take the e-podium and Gautam to please display the slides.
Okay, Shivangi, can you hear me okay?
Absolutely perfect.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, thanks for having me and also considering Infineon to be a part of this distinguished panel. So I'd like to first start off by talking a little bit about Infineon technologies, and then I'll dive into our startup engagement model. And then lastly, I'll cover some aspects of what we are doing in the current COVID-19 crisis, right? So next slide, please. Gautam. Could I have the next? Yeah, thank you. So Infineon Technologies is actually a top 10 semiconductor company. Roughly, our revenue is about 10 billion euros a year, 50,000 employees worldwide. A lot of those employees are actually engaged in research and development. As some of you may know, the semiconductor industry is highly R&D intensive. So a lot of our revenue is plowed back into R&D. and we have a global R&D footprint with almost 50 locations worldwide. There are a couple of areas which I'd like to highlight on this page where we are very strong. One is obviously power discretes. So these are what are known as the sort of the muscles of the semiconductor world. These actually actuate and move things. And the other area is the compute area, which is microcontrollers. And this actually forms the brain of many systems. So in both these areas, we are among the top few companies in the world. And we are happy to be there. Next slide, please. So what do we see as our mission? Our mission is to connect the real world with the digital world. And what do I mean by that? As you can see on the left side of the slide, there are all these real world applications which all of us encounter in day-to-day life. These could be, 5G applications, connected cars, IoT, drives and renewable energies and so on. But what is actually needed is this sort of connect. If you look at the human body, and I draw an analogy here, you actually see with your eyes and you sense with your senses, and then you actually, your brain actually does the computation, and then your muscles power the movement. In the same way, in the semiconductor world, you have sense, actuate, and compute, which is performed by different parts of Infineon's portfolio. And that actually then, through products which provide connectivity, i.e. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, those kind of connectivity devices, then connects to the digital world. And why is this important? It's very important because, we've all heard this cliche of data being the new oil. It's sort of true. A lot of business models are built upon leveraging this data, which is built upon hardware and software platforms. And then this actually helps to utilize assets and things in a much more optimal way. So there's actually a very nice feedback loop, which then goes back to the real world from the digital world. So the way Infineon sees its role is actually this bridge between the digital world on the right side and the real world on the left side. Next slide, please, Gautam. And not to forget to mention, actually, we are very proud of our commitment towards sustainability. Semiconductors consume a fair amount of electricity, energy in producing them. But our semiconductors actually end up in applications such as hybrid electric vehicles, renewable energies, extremely efficient home appliances, as well as very efficient transmission mechanisms for energy, which then allows these devices over their lifetime to actually help companies, our customers, save much more of CO2 than we actually consume in producing these semiconductors. So our balance is actually very, very positive. And one way to look at it is, as you see via examples on the bottom part of the slide, it just shows you the amount of CO2 which we can actually save with our products. I like the example of the A380 flying between Singapore and Munich, and how many trips that can make with this amount of CO2 which our products have enabled companies to save. Next slide, please, Gautam. Yeah, maybe you can just click through this. Thank you. Right, so now I'll switch gears a bit and talk about our engagement with startups. And the way we engage with startups is actually in a step ladder of engagement. It's a model by which we have 4 increasingly intense modes of working together with startups. So on this step ladder, on the lowest rung of the ladder, you can actually see that we just engage with startups, we talk about projects, we introduce our products to them, and they begin to use these products in some interesting applications. The second step on the ladder is actually then how we engage with incubators and accelerators, and we sort of build this network where we engage with startups, we offer seminars, we coach them on how to use key things from our portfolio, engineers offer advice, and so on. The third step is actually the definition of joint projects. So actually over here, I think the previous panelist actually had talked about how his company is working jointly with startups on projects and give the example of the nice composites thing. We also do the same thing. We define projects jointly with startups, and these projects could be for solving internal problems at Infineon, problems which come out of our processes to improve our processes, and internal requirements, or they could be problem statements which then address the market. So we look at both things, right? So that's then the third step. And the final thing is that actually in Singapore, we have our in-house incubation space where we actually host startups at a time. So we have cohorts of startups which come in and they stay for a predefined period of time. We don't charge rental. And they then work jointly together with our engineers and co-create solutions. And the way we measure success in that is what is the valuation of the startup when it entered the co-innovation space at Infineon, how many employees did it have, and what were its revenues like, and at the exit of that particular startup from the co-innovation space, how many employees did it have, what was its valuation, and what kind of IPs did it generate, how much revenues did it make, and so on. It's got to be a win-win situation, not just for Infineon, but also for the startup involved. So that's sort of our four-step in our step ladder approach towards startups. Next slide, please, Gautam. And here's a snapshot of the ecosystem which we built up over the last 3 years. These are a series of incubators and accelerators who we are actually actively partnering with. So of particular relevance to this audience from India would be the first actually incubator we partnered with was called Electropreneur Park. It's in the South Campus of Delhi University. It's a hardware-focused incubator, and we've been working with them with multiple startups which have gone through there over the last 3 years or so. There's also Sangam AIC. This is incubator based in Gurgaon. It's focused on renewable energies. And we are working together with them on areas, for example, providing frugal solutions for Indian needs, renewable energy solutions, and so on and so forth. Another thing I'd like to emphasize is NSR Cell. This is the NS Raghavan Center at IIM Bangalore. We started working with them some time ago. Here we actually work in the area of software development and machine learning and AI-focused models. So each of the 3 incubators that we are working with are sort of a different niche, right? And besides this, we're also part of Big Sun, which is an alliance of companies in Bangalore, all German corporates together working with startups in the Bangalore area. There are also other incubators and accelerators on this list. There are some in Singapore which are actually pan-Asia. They look at startups from all across Asia and they sort of host them. There's also a unique, relatively unique incubator we are working with called the German Accelerator. This actually looks at outbound startups from Germany, which are looking to spread their wings in the Asian region. And we also, so we look at both, startups from Asia going out, but also startups from Germany coming in. On the right side, and you finally see some of our more informal partnerships. So we have worked with Plug and Play. We've hosted a hackathon last year jointly with one of our customers. We've also worked with some of these other people on this list to just run competitions and so on, and especially with Shivangi and her team. So at Startup India, we did an AI challenge which just closed. So we got a fantastic response to that on our problem statement. Next slide, please. Right, and now coming to the current crisis situation. So here, just wanted to leave you with 3 examples. Obviously, we are a technology-focused company, and we feel that there are elements of this crisis where technology can play a key role in helping us mitigate this crisis, overcome this crisis. So we are actively in the process of now working to put these, projects in place via funding. These are at some of the premier institutes in India, but they're actually from startups and entrepreneurial groups within these premier institutes. And as you can see there, they cover topics which are low cost ventilator design or the power backup system. What we want to do is we actually want to play our part in funding the development of these innovative solutions, which will provide products which are both designed in India as well as manufactured in India and actually tailored for Indian needs. So that's sort of our goal with this, right? So with that, I'll stop and I'll be happy to take questions later. Thank you, Shivangi.
Thank you so much, Rohit. It's great to see Infineon working with startups worldwide. I would now request Shruti to please plug in her slides and take the audience through what Cisco is up to. Shruti, you're on mute.
Sure, Shivangi. And I hope this is visible right now.
Yes, it's visible, and you're very much audible, Shruti.
Cool. So thank you, Shivangi and team Startup India. Great job at bringing the ecosystem together for the benefit of the humanity. So I represent Cisco today, and let's get to the first things first. What is top of mind for everybody? Of course, COVID. It's been a game changer for the entire humanity. Indeed, we've not witnessed something of this scale at all. So Cisco has pitched in with a $225 million commitment, both in cash and kind, and our singular premise has been to keep people connected together and keep them at home, safe, and ensure business continuity. So to that extent, we've pitched in with Cisco's flagship products like Cisco's WebEx to enable collaboration. In fact, if you heard our CEO Chuck Robbins mention on some of the reports, we've had about 5.5 billion meeting minutes in just the first 10 days of March, and we've been holding about 15 billion meetings every month. Now, this is all powered with the security and the privacy, of course, with Cisco Umbrella, Duo Security, and all of our portfolio products pitching in. We all endeavor to make the experience and business continuity seamless for the audience. And these are for the banks, industries, governments, unicorns, startups, and communities that are adopting this at large. So how are we doing this? We're, of course, not doing this all by ourselves. It's a whole ecosystem in play. And I would like to jump onto the innovation ecosystem of Cisco. If we go back in time to 1993, that was our first acquisition that we had. It was a startup called Crescendo Communication. And we've come a long way from there. Till recently, when in April 2020, we acquired a startup called Fluid Mesh Networks. So it's a constant journey of looking and engaging very deeply with the startup ecosystem. And it's a complete life cycle, a full spectrum approach that we take while we work with the startup ecosystem and our partners. So as a relevance to this audience on this call today, I'm going to jump a little bit more deeper into Cisco Launchpad, which is Cisco's startup accelerator that looks at early stage deep tech startups. Our focus areas are mainly threefold. We look at number one on the enterprise tech, which is the core of networking, communication, and connectivity. The second pillar is about digital transformation. You can think of anything on the earth, right from agriculture to mining to retail to health tech. It's all about digital transformation and powering it using IoT and digitization. And the third pillar rests on futuristic tech. This is where our partnerships with the academia come into place, and we work with startups that stem out of research and work on very cutting edge technologies like quantum safe computing, Li-Fi, to name a few. So below you see are some of these startups that we've worked with. And what we provide to these startups from Cisco Launchpad is, of course, the access to tech. Customer connects mean a lot to them because it's about providing the visibility and awareness, the stage to give them the limelight. Funding is, of course, a key part. We give them a small grant, an equity-free grant as part of the Cisco Launchpad program, but there's much more to it. And of course, it's just not about networking as a technology. It's also about network in the sense of people, because that's where I think we as humans, in fact, can utilize the cascading effect of spreading the positivity around. Cisco Launchpad, similar to the other panelists before me, we've also operated in cohort models. We've done about 6 cohorts and worked with 47 startups. And this involves a good amount of Cisco mentors, while there is a larger external mentor pool also that's involved in all of this mentorship process on the technology as well as business side of things. I'm very proud and pleased to share that 66% of them have gotten follow-on funding, which is indeed a validation of the thesis of these startups that we've been working with and we've been giving an impetus to. And this is a great boost for these startups to go and perform further and beyond. And the crux of all of it here is the POC's integration and the joint go-to-market that we've been driving with the startups. Because at the end of the day, if you just keep pumping in more and more of energy into a startup, but don't give them an outlet for all of these, it doesn't really matter how much of inputs you feed in. The outputs is what matters. So I think that's where the key takeaway is. And of course, you can see the growth metrics speak for themselves in terms of the revenue, traction, and team sizes. So this is a short glimpse of the startup solution stack across different technologies that we've been building with these startups. And coming to the top today, right? So there is no doubt absolutely that the business conditions are changing, and this essentially means that the innovation ecosystem is not going to remain the same. But I want to call out a couple of recent successes of some of our portfolio startups. Like, for example, Hello Messenger, they raised a 20 million Series B round. Vernacular.ai, they raised a Series A round. Orbo acquired another startup from the US, while Cloudneeti was acquired by a startup by a leading security, which is Zscaler. Now, the likes of Cloud Physician, which is on the healthcare front, and if you were, sorry, I stay close to an airport, and I think the pilots are busy prepping for a good day ahead. So there is a bit of background noise. Apologies for that. So we have the likes of Cloud Physician, which is at the forefront, capitalizing on the situation at hand. And I think I want to kind of allude to this point where, of all the theories that we've seen and heard so far, what is most important and what is more meaningful to today's situation is the theory of evolution. It's all about adaptation, right? Of course, not all startups are lucky to be acquired or funded like Hello Messenger or Cloudneeti as such. Since I work on the ground very closely with a startup, I'm going to touch on these aspects a little bit more. Of course, you can ask me more questions as we proceed. So there are a couple of patterns that we see in the ecosystem that I want to share over here. So it's all about the theory of evolution. It's about rising to the occasion. So this startup called Cloud Physician, which was also demonstrated in the Startup India's DPIIT demo day, and thanks to Startup India for setting that up. It's a brilliant initiative for bringing in the best of talent pool together and showcasing it to the right people, the right audience across the country. Because I think it's all about value engineering. So at this point of time, we all realize that we are in a state of in between this. It's a transition phase. It's a passage that we will have to cross through. And during this time, the support that we get are not going to last in the next couple of quarters to come. So it's all about how do we capitalize on that. So now Cloud Physician, for instance, rose to this occasion, and they have been instrumental in setting up the hospitals, the EICUs, in places like Ramnagara, which is a place in Karnataka, for instance, and they are expanding a lot more. And I would also want to point that ACT grants has been instrumental in providing them the required impetus for this, while we at Cisco have also been helping them on this front. So the other point that I want to emphasize, Shivangi, sorry, do you still hear a strong background noise from my end?
Shruti, we can still hear you, so I think it's fine. You can carry on.
Okay, cool. So I think as we proceed to the next quarters, because today there is a problem of plenty on one side, and there is a problem of a lot of challenges on the other side. But there is one thing for sure is that the coming quarters, it's all about value mining. One plus one, people will definitely want to not look at two, but much more than that. So it is very imperative that from a finance point of view, from an HR point of view, it's all about nurturing and empathy and the solidarity that we show to the. It's all about the gratitude, in fact, that we show back to the ecosystem that we are in. So I think the three mantras here would be to stay frugal, limit our exposure, and optimize not only on the dollars but on all possible stuff, because it is very imminent that the resource base is going to shrink, the ambiguity is going to rise, as in any crisis situation, and people are going to be prone to anxiety and panic. I would like to call on this 70-20-10 rule, if you are familiar with it. People typically focus on the core tasks for 70% of time, 20% of the time, and 10% of the time. It's about focusing on some of the minor aspects. Now, if you look back at this crisis situation, you would see some stark patterns that the 10% and 20% in very many cases have come back to the fore. So I think that very clearly brings us back the next point, on how do we sail through this. And if you notice this, I'm talking all in the first person, because this is something that we are experiencing ourselves as a big enterprise, as a startup accelerator, and this is something that we strongly recommend these startups to adopt as well. So the three things again that I want to share in here is going back to the drawing board. It's important to persevere, right? You need to be in the reflection mode to reveal at a later point of time. So those who are able to pivot and prioritize, and very importantly, calibrate on the core strengths. The core is very important. Of course, we will have a multiple on our hands, and this indeed is the right time to go back to the drawing boards along with the teams and build expertise that is very consistent with our own DNAs. The second point I want to stress on is on building a strong foundation. Now, when I say strong foundation, I would also want to touch on the network effect. Right? This is a time when people are glued to their mobile devices. People are much more accessible. Travel is all cut down, and people are stuck to their own laptops and mobiles. So people are much more open to connecting actively. So we are seeing that this is the time which is right for connecting actively. And though this may be, a temporary phase, this is indeed the time to build very strong and meaningful relationships with your employees, your support ecosystem, as well as with the business partners. And last but not the least, I want to stress on this aspect of perk up and propelling to success. Very, very important as a leader to lead the way, exuberate positivity. Of course, the crisis is there. Of course, just think of World War II and the likes of Japan and Germany, the way they've come back. Think of the likes of so many earthquakes around the world. People have not just laid down, we've all come back and rebuilt. That is the power of humanity. And if I were to shift gears to become a little bit more philosophical here, I think it's the power of we, the power of you, and the self-belief that we have as humans. I think this is very, very important. In fact, I was reading up the story of a person. He actually met with an accident, and his car got damaged, but he was actually throwing a party. Now people would wonder, hey, this is a crazy fellow giving a party after an accident. Now when people went and asked him, he said, hey, I'm giving a party not more as an enjoyment, but to show my gratitude. Because even though the car is gone, nothing has happened to me. I'm still strong and able to sail through all of this, right? So I think that is the kind of self drive in, not only amongst us as leaders, but also amongst everybody around us to exuberate the positivity. So I would finally like to conclude with one very interesting quote that my grandmom has been telling me all my childhood. It's all about doing the hard work and persevering. Heights by great men reached and kept were not by a sudden flight, but they, while their companions slept, were toiling upwards in the night. So, though we are sailing through the night right now, light is very much nearby. The end of the tunnel is very much nearby. And we hope all the efforts that we are putting in together, all the positivity that we are exuberating together will lead us all to success. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shruti, and thank you so much for actually spreading the infectious positivity. Also, we've seen, all of us have seen in our individual capacities also, that how the businesses have been coming close together, how the network effect is actually now collaborating, and people are coming in together and helping and supporting each other. I think that's definitely very, very key, and we are aware that Cisco has been mentoring a lot many startups, which has led to many successes also and many follow-up rounds also. So thank you so much for bringing those insights, and your experience of working with the startups very, very closely is actually going to be extremely useful for the panel right now. I think a lot of meaningful insights have been shared, and there's a lot for the audience to absorb also. So we can actually start with our questions. The first question that I wanted to pose to the panel was, so we know that we're talking about the new normal, and of course, people have their guesses there that what should it be, and people are actually in two minds with respect to many things. So while many of the startups will be pivoting their business models, what do you think the approach and strategies that they should definitely keep in mind, which you would want to highlight? So Rohit, if we could hear from you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So I think the most important thing, I think, sitting in a corporate, we obviously have our own risk mitigation plans and things which are in place now, business continuity plans, and so on. But if you're in a startup, right, I think the most important thing I would recommend is something which he also referenced to, be frugal, right? Do cash conservation. I think that's, first of all, the need of the hour. Before you can talk big strategy, the first thing is you must stay solvent as a small company, right? So cash conservation, cut down to basics, right, and be frugal as much as possible. I think things have changed a lot. Be realistic in terms of valuations now. One of the things we see periodically, almost every decade or so, is that valuations in the startup domain sort of hit sort of a big peak, and then there's a financial crisis, and then valuations will pretty much melt away. So I think it's very important for people, because if you ideally you're an entrepreneur, you've launched a startup, you actually believe in something, and you're not in it just for the money. So you must keep that faith. Something again my previous panelist referred to, right? It looks like the night is very dark and long, but keep the faith, conserve cash, stay true, and then think about pivoting, right? So a few things are like, obviously, everybody is now talking about asset light approaches, no big offices, everybody works from home. Try to use digital tools as much as possible. Try to use free resources as much as possible. There's a lot of free resources available for online collaboration and connection, and so on, right? So those would be my things, without specifically knowing the domain of the startup. I mean, there are a few areas which we think will pull out very strong after this crisis is over. I think there'll be a lot more focus on healthcare. I think that was one part of the economy which probably didn't get as much attention as before. I think it'll get a lot more. And then I think there'll be a lot more interesting application areas, like which will make collaboration and remote work easier. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities in those areas. And beyond that, I think in terms of data, So data centers, connectivity, that's going to be, I think, much bigger. And then obviously applications which would enable business travel to be smoother, things which can sort of help to reboot the retail and the food and beverage industry. I think all of those are going to be in big demand.
Anything that Shruti or William you would like to add to this one?
Yeah, maybe just briefly, I think I touched on the tail end, and each of the other panelists did as well. I think leveraging the strengths of the startups is being lean and nimble. I think, as you mentioned, Rohit, to be able to, sustain and position for, a medium, longer term impact, given, the shock, if you will, to the system with the COVID crisis, the lockdown and such. The ability to engage remotely and finding ways to make those connections. My early introduction to startups were through incubators or more maybe traditional means. And now it's going to be, what is that virtual incubator that actually moves faster, allows faster connects, quicker identification of where there are connections, or maybe quicker to realize that there are not, and then you move on. And then I think a persistence that Shruti talked about, that I can only speak from my experience working in large companies. I haven't had the advantage of working in a startup. There's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of internal friction, if you will, that frankly the startups don't have. But what they need to then engage and know they're engaging with many companies, small, medium, or large, that have that internal friction. So having the persistence with the big ideas that really are what's the driving force in those startups, and really making not just the connection, but the follow through, and knowing that it may be more incumbent on the startup than it is on the company that you're trying to engage, just because you need to get your message across. And similarly, in a large company, we say it's the internal cell is toughest, not so much the external cell. And so it's the same idea when we're making those connections, trying to identify startups, but then have the persistence to make the business case that's going to make the difference, ultimately, to take your idea or your product or your solution to market.
I would also like to add a slightly different flavor to this conversation. It's all about sustainability, right? So we talk about a lot of revenues, numbers, and scale up. But at the end of the day, what matters most is also whether this is sustainable. Is this organic? I think it's important to get back closer to our own roots, closer to our own DNA, and go with the flow of what is, much more meaningful. I think we need to put in a little bit more of our thought process to that, because I do have a strong feeling that most of the growth has been pretty mechanical and inorganic over the several decades and the centuries. And I think this is a nature-driven approach to give us this time to mandatorily stay in a timeout and say, hey, are you doing the right thing? Do you want to look back and correct your course of action? So I would definitely put sustainability as one of the top things that every business should also think about in incorporating in their products.
So I think very rightly put by all three of you that, staying frugal and having a sustainable structure, and also, benefiting on the structures is going to be extremely important. But, while the businesses are kind of, working on their business models, many of them actually feel that, those are the sustainable business models, because, these kind of unforeseen and, uncontrollable factors, which have never been seen before, cannot really be accounted for fully. So and this is just a follow-up question to Shruti, what you just mentioned, that, how can startups better adapt to the unforeseen circumstances for the uncontrolled factors of, one such that we're experiencing right now, like the pandemic?
So, never does a storm. Of course, we do have all these prediction mechanisms to tell us that there is a storm that's coming in and all that. Now, we've seen the worst. We've seen the worst when the COVID hit us with no warning at all. So the future is kind of known, right? So we know that the new normal is going to be social distancing and all of that. So I think we are in fact at a better position right now to say how we want to shape the new world. Like, so from that point, I would again go back to some of the points that I mentioned earlier, is to stay true to your own self, stay authentic, build on your core strengths, and that's what will give us a solid foundation to connect actively on. And this connection with all the meaningful relationship built, and with a strong focus on digital transformation. Now, with all these newer terminologies coming in the funding perspective, this EBIT tag, how COVID resistant is your business, right? So I think we need to get that hat on and think about, hey, what can I do in case this additional thing hits me at another point of time. So with all of that immunity measures built in, I'm sure we will be able to crack the glass ceilings. But it's all about the preparedness. If you were to dig a well, I think it's all about the time you actually build in planning for it and build through it. The water will only come in at the last second, but the efforts that you put in, it's very critical. And I wouldn't, in fact, think of businesses going back to, hey, this is a bad time kind of a mode. This is, in fact, a boon for all of us. So go back to our drawing board, spend so much of this reflection time with our teams to build a solid foundation.
So I think definitely many of the businesses would also be seeing this as an opportunity. We've spoken about, Rohit's reflected on a few of the booming sectors. I think also one question which, the audience would probably have in mind is that what course of action should the startups which are actually in sectors which are difficult to move online, or the process is going to be extremely gradual. So what course of action can those startups take up where, for many of the businesses, moving digital is easier than the others? If you talk about manufacturing sectors or retail, of course, we've seen a lot of big companies now stepping in the market and, supporting those retailers. But, what do you suggest here and what course of action can be taken up? If you could understand from you, William.
Well, I was going to, follow up. Actually, it's a good question. With what Shruti said was, digital transformation was a key focus for us as a company. It's a key focus globally. For us, it's more of how we implement it in our operations and then in the solutions we deliver to customers. And so I think that this COVID crisis is just a huge accelerator to digital transformation, both the need, the impetus, and then real outcomes. Because we talk about what's the new normal. We don't know what that is yet, but for certain, it's going to require much more remote engagement, and so it's going to change the way we operate. I think one of the things maybe I'll share is that there's a lot of unmet needs that we have that we probably don't even know yet. We're just starting to explore it. I think there's going to be new startups out there that innovate and identify and really have insights as to what are the unmet needs. The telemedicine, is an idea that probably goes back 20 years or more in some utility, but how is that going to change the whole marketplace in terms of how healthcare is delivered, and in a way much more effectively, because we can get out to remote villages almost equally as well as we can in cities. Then, therefore, to provide the level of capability. That's just maybe one example, but I'm sure in every sector it's going to be shifting our mindset a little bit. We were looking at digital transformation to stay competitive, right? To remove cost and drive speed and simplicity and effectivity ultimately. But now it's going to be equally as important as to how we even just are able to deliver our solutions in a remote and responsible and sustainable way. So I don't know if I fully answered your question, but I think your question plus the earlier comments, I feel like there's a tremendous opportunity to start to think about what's going to change the game as we work in a much more digital and remote operating model.
Absolutely. Rohit, Shruti, would you have anything to add here in terms of, any tips for the startups which have difficulty in moving the businesses online right now?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's not possible for every startup to do everything online, but I think, I do concur with the other panelists that there are certain aspects, whether you call it digital transformation or frugality or whatever you will, there are aspects of your business which you can do in a much, I would say, much more digital manner. Maybe not everything, right? But you can certainly do that. It also leads to increased productivity and lower costs, right? And then I think most importantly, right? I mean, the demands are actually obviously going to come back at some point. We just don't know yet. I think everybody's exhausted the entire alphabet talking about recovery patterns, V, W, L, whatever alphabet, right? They have, but we can be sure of one thing: the demand's going to come back because this is a different kind of a crisis, right? This is a crisis which is kind of artificial. So the demand's going to come back. It'll come back in slightly different ways, and I think that's where the startup has to think about how they need to tailor their solution to what comes back, and maybe even shape it in some way, right?
So, Rohit, what do you think that in this period probably the startup should prioritize? So, of course, we've spoken about a few approaches and strategies which they should definitely keep on mind. But if they're working from scratch and right now they're thinking of pivoting their models, what do you think should be the top two, three priorities which they should definitely keep in mind, and that's how they should kind of move on after they've pivoted the model?
Yeah, I mean, scenario planning is something which comes to mind. It's a classical tool of strategy and planning. I think everybody talks about it, but do they really, actually do it rigorously? I think before you start back, you can't just have a very optimistic kind of a business plan now. I think one of the things you have to be very careful about now is we don't know how long this recovery is going to take, what's going to be the shape of the recovery, and so on. So I would encourage them to do a lot of thinking around scenarios of recovery, and what do those mean in terms of cash burn? What do those mean in terms of their existing sort of financing which they've lined up? What does it mean in terms of the employee count which they have, and external arrangements with suppliers and so on, right? And I think there is time now. It's kind of downtime, but it's time to actually really work hard on those models.
Thank you so much, Rohit. That's definitely insightful, and I think I'm sure the audience must be taking a note of it in terms of the pointers that you mentioned that the startup should definitely keep in mind. So, Willem, just wanted to understand from you. Of course, there's a separate vertical which Lockheed has been focusing on, which is of LM Ventures. So, do you see any investor behavior change, or do you foresee any specific patterns or any specific change in investor behavior or their perspective on how they evaluate a startup for further investment? So do you see any change in that?
From an LM Ventures perspective, I think their model is one where think of it as a pipeline where they want to get very quick identification of new and relevant startups that we could see connecting into each of the business areas that I talked about as our company, and accelerating through those, and then identifies, if we make an investment of say $5 to $10 million, is that really going to lead to a strategic level of capability, and is there a way for us to employ it? So in that sense, I don't see that changing, and I don't want to speak for LM Ventures per se. From a personal perspective, though, I do believe that from the statements that I made earlier, that in a way this crisis is an accelerator of opportunities for startups. And so in that sense, we're going to have to move faster than we have in the past. I think just the environment that we're operating in is going to demand that. And so how do we do that? And then the other dimension too is, working internationally. As a company, we're a bit US centric, if I can say that, obviously, given our defense customer in the US. And so we're always competing for mind share, if you will, as to identifying startups that maybe are outside the what is the traditional envelope that we would address, and then internationally where we can employ those. And so I think we have to open up our aperture a little bit more, in summary, and accelerate through the identification, the evaluation, and the disposition. Is this one we want to work with, invest, and then move on? Because I think just the pace virtually is going to have to be faster, even though it feels like we're on a pause right now.
All right. So, Shruti was just wanted to understand from you, since you've been working so closely with the startups on ground and have been mentoring so many. So, what has your feedback been from the startup perspective, which were actually probably in the process of raising, any of the rounds right now? So, how's their experience been, and how do you foresee the situation having worked with the startups so closely?
So the interactions that we've had so far, I would honestly say it's been a mixed bag. Right. So on one end, you have the set of businesses that are very relevant, addressing the problems of today and tomorrow, are getting much more funding. Whereas the others, which were focusing on very important areas, but unfortunately, the relevance has suddenly shifted gears to a different pole. So I think they are at the lack of it, at the lag end of it. So I think it's all about creating, understanding the opportunities, like William pointed out, understand the opportunities, capitalize on what's available today, what are the challenges of today. If you think of it, neither were the WhatsApps nor the Facebooks available to us 20 years back. And the technology and the ecosystem has totally changed. We didn't have a Startup India webinar when the last pandemic hit us, right? So I think things are drastically changing. So the startup that capitalizes on this opportunity, things with the right vision filter on, will definitely get a benefit.
So we do understand from you that there's a positive outlook here, and of course, I think as mentioned by you and William, I think the ventures would have to expand their horizon and also accelerate the pace at which they're moving. So Rohit, you having worked in and having working right now in the M&A sector and the strategy sector. So how do you kind of foresee the M&A or deal scenario post COVID? Any particular trends that you see emerging basis your experience?
But I think, right now it's difficult to do deals, right? There's a human element of deal making, a lot of discussions, a lot of informal kind of engagement before you can actually think of consummating a deal. That's not happening. So I think there's obviously a slowdown in the M&A space. I've read reports of certain deals being done in this period totally virtually, but I think those are exceptions. Um, that's what I would say right now. I mean, in terms of the M&A landscape, right? But I think if this crisis drags on for longer, obviously that then leads to increased activity later, because there could be some period of consolidation in some industries where some of the weaker players then actually end up in some financial trouble. So that could be coming down, but at the moment, no, it looks like it's fairly low.
All right, all right. And Rohit, also because I think you understand the Singapore ecosystem also very well, and Infineon has been working on, has been operating the innovation space in the market there. So, what major changes do you see in terms of how startups are coming up with responses in India versus Singapore? And William, similarly, let's say for US versus India. So, how do you see that? There's if there's been any difference in what the difference has been, and anything that our Indian startups can actually adopt from there.
But I think in both locations, actually, we've seen some interesting activity around solutions for the new normal, if you will, right? So the current way of operating, there have been a lot of apps which have been obviously software is the first thing which takes off, right? When people have to come out with solutions. On the hardware side, we've seen some interesting applications of robotics. It started in the healthcare sector where you had applications of robots being used with ultraviolet light for disinfectation. You had a lot of food delivery robots come in. Most recently in Singapore, you had the Boston Dynamics robot actually, actually go around and talk about social distancing in parks and things like that. So actually automation and robotics, right? We see some interesting sort of activities there. And the other part I would say is software, software for collaboration, software for enabling business to go back to normal. And I think as far as India is concerned, I think our engagement has been mostly on enabling sort of responses to COVID, right? So it's very heartening to see that startups and entrepreneurial groups very quickly able to think about new ventilator designs, new kinds of test kits, which are sort of very low cost and suitable for India's environment. And of course, power backup system like the one which we are supporting, which would then enable the ventilator to operate in an environment where electricity might not be reliable. So yes, you see on both sides very interesting activities.
All right.
Yeah,
And yeah, please
I was
go
just going to
ahead.
say those are great points, and that was kind of my thought, is that the just the environment that we're in is driving much more rapid innovation and trial, and success and failure, and then trial again, in a way that probably wouldn't have been as embraced previously. And just to add another dimension, I think, of what may be both incubating and then sustainability in the defense domain, but it's not limited to that. There's just a lot of collaboration between US and India through different technology initiatives. And so in science and technology, on the space domain side, as an example, I think there's probably much more untapped opportunity in finding how we as companies, large, small, medium, and even startups, can operate in support of what might be government-to-government initiatives to address the COVID crisis, to restore some collaboration and economic opportunities. In the defense domain, there's startups in Silicon Valley that are very much connected with DoD that can be equally connected through Startup India, through Invest India, Niti Aayog, in with the MOD. And so I think there's an interdependency now that's been created in the fight against COVID that is going to be enduring relationships under that government-to-government model that we as companies, whether we're large or all the way down to startups, can operate underneath that and really be, ultimately the engine that drives that. The big ideas may come through the government-to-government interactions, but they ultimately need to be implemented commercially. And so I'll just leave it at that, because I think that's still ahead of us.
From my perspective, irrespective of any of these locations, two things have really stood out for me. One is double clicking on the point that William mentioned is on collaboration. The other is innovation. Right? So never ever before have we seen such a strong call from the governments for startups and innovators to come to the fore and contribute so aggressively. So I would definitely, call that out, and thanks to all the initiatives taken by Startup India and all the innovation players across the ecosystem, across the globe, for stepping up and taking a strong mantle at solving the problems for all of us.
I think it's definitely work in progress, and a lot of innovation departments have been working together. And this is also a shout out to the startups which are actually attending this session. And if you think you have any of the innovations which can actually help us, combat or cope up with the current situation, then we're actually looking at all those applications. So you can definitely write into us. I think one very important question that I wanted to touch base on was, and I'll start with you, Shruti, that there has been a lot of news, and we have seen a lot of positive movement also around women workforce participation that we've seen, which has come as an opportunity in this situation. So of course in many businesses, especially in the traditional businesses, we honestly haven't seen a lot many women leaders. So you being one, how's your experience been, and how do you see that change? And then I would really like Rohit and William to kind of add on to it, that if they see this as an opportunity, and how has it changed for your companies?
I think the first buzzword that we just busted was digital transformation, and the second buzzword that we are now busting is women in workforce. So I fondly recollect hosting a webinar in the Grace Hopper Conference of Women in Computing way back in 2012. It was a topic titled "Back to Work," right? Back to business for women, and people were looking at with very curious eyes to figure out, hey, what is this and all that. But now I think it is becoming the norm. A lot of companies, including Cisco, we are reviving the approaches that we are taking towards women back in the workforce. And as I read in a lot of reports that are giving us numbers, this is going to contribute to a huge factor in terms of the country as well as the economic growth of the domestic households. I think it means a lot for the viable workforce to come to the fore and contribute.
Yeah, if I could just add, we, pre-COVID, partnered with Tata in Hyderabad. We've got a women's apprenticeship program where we bring women in from remote villages from all over India into, opportunities in a factory setting. And it's truly an apprenticeship program from a training, mentoring, development. And one of the concerns we had with the lockdown is that, basically that brings that to, basically a pause. But, we wanted to try to find an opportunity, and we haven't fully realized this, but the thought was that through this women's apprenticeship program, where they've had over 30 women go through this and they've moved up the ranks in the operations there, they can connect back with their home villages. And so with what they're learning, to say just the day-to-day, how do you deal with COVID and get that message out, pan-India, we thought that was a great connection to develop. I'll say it's a great idea, not fully implemented, but the point I wanted to make is that because of the virtual connection, we had already started a mentoring program with those women apprentices that we have. And now we want to take it to the next level. And so it used to be, on a smaller scale basis. Now I think we can actually tap into mentors globally within our operations, other women that have come up through the ranks, whether it's engineering or operations, and give them insights as to what they can employ. And so I think it's a small example, but it was purposefully, in line with, I think, the vision that Ratan Tata has in terms of increasing the diversity of the workforce, and the fact that if you have a diverse workforce, you're more capable and more resilient. And so it's a really, really important dimension to bring out. And frankly, I think a more digital environment is going to be an enabler for that.
Yeah, so maybe I'll add a few words from my side. So I concur. I think first of all, Infineon is deeply committed to diversity. Our CEO has made that statement many times, but we're actually living this. We have a lot of women in leadership roles. We are obviously a very technology-centric company, so we would like to see more women enter STEM fields. We'd like to see more women in engineering. And we are obviously doing our part to do that. So Shivangi, you may recall that even on the AI challenge, we have this special award for an all-women's team, which submits the best AI-enabled solution. So all of that, right? And I do agree. I think this digitalization trend and remote work, I think this will actually help companies embrace diversity even more.
So, but Shivangi, in fact, going a tad beyond a gender-based, workforce expansion, I would also, kind of call this for a, looking at more of a flexible and sustainable expansion in workforce, because if you look at the constitution of all our metro and the cosmopolitan cities today, if you look at all the problems that are associated with it, it's all because of the physical nature of presence that has been long mandated for our contribution. And now that we are seeing the entire workforce is able to operate from their own native locations as well, which means there is a huge hope for flexible and sustainable workforce. So I would call it that way rather than put only the gender filter on.
I think I would completely agree with you, Shruti, on that. I think flexible workforce participation is something that we've been looking forward to, and probably it's definitely going to increase the participation and the contribution from more people in the economy also. I think we've actually exceeded the time, but I just before closing, as a part of the closing of this panel, I would just want to, for the audience out there, we've discussed about multiple programs where each one of you have been working with the startups. For the audience who does not have that channel right now, so how can they approach you? How can they actually reach out to Lockheed, Cisco, and Infineon in that case if they want to collaborate with you? And one super tip that you have, for the startups who are attending this session right now. So we can start with you, Shruti.
So, as I mentioned earlier, Cisco has been involved in the entire spectrum and the life cycle of startups, right from the early stage. So, in fact, I would just call out certain specific touch points. So, if you are an early stage deep tech for profit startups, Launchpad is the way to go. The focus here is on integration and go to market. If you are a social startup looking at non-profit sector, looking at more of a community approach, then we have a couple of initiatives from our CSR wing where we work with an incubator called Encore. So that's the way to go. Cisco Investments, we've long been in this game and we've been pretty active at that, investing heavily on these sectors. So of course you can reach out to us through our websites and the contacts which are readily available on public domain. And I think we are all in the game to show as much support and solidarity to the startup ecosystem.
So, William, if you would like to add to it, and the message to the audience in terms of working with Lockheed.
Yeah, sure. I think, traditionally what we've done over the last 13 years in India is through the India Innovation Growth Program and connection in through the Department of Science and Technology and in partnership with Tata Trusts. And so that is one vehicle through which we can connect. It's a great question. And I'd actually like to follow up and, give you some additional feedback so that if these startups contact you, Shivangi, that you can then help broker that and make that connection to Lockheed Martin. Because what comes to mind is I think we need to find a different vehicle, literally online, for how that connection can be made and the information can be provided. And like I said, pipeline of ideas and startups so that we can start to connect more quickly. So I'd be open to, a different mode of doing that. That's more nimble. LM Ventures is another opportunity. I think that's at a higher level, but again, it's after the initial connection is made. So I think we need to find a way to have a more effective clearinghouse, if that's the right term, an incubator process that is more specific to what would translate to actions. We have like an annual supplier conference. We can't move at that speed. So we're going to look to have a virtual supplier conference coming up here, and we want startups to be a big part of that. And so that's going to be another connection point where we would have a virtual event and then follow up with face-to-face later this year in a more traditional manner to really try to find next steps. So that's just a few ideas, but I'm open to more. And if you could help make those connections, that's where I think this event itself has been incredibly effective that way, Shivangi. So I appreciate your leadership in making that happen. So we're open and happy to connect.
Thank you, William. We'll definitely be a bridge, and we'll connect you with as many startup requests that we get on our side. Rohit, what are your closing comments here?
Yeah, so thank you, Shivangi. I think the same. Likewise, we have our R&D center in Bangalore. So obviously, through you, Shivangi, they can reach out to the person in charge of the innovation program there. Also, we have our communication head based out of NCR, Delhi. So they can also reach out to her. And finally, for Singapore, also, we have a contact person, Shivangi, for those startups which are interested to reach out to us here, right? And finally, in terms of that one piece of advice, I think, I'll just like to quote our CEO. He says, innovation is all about people and the rest is technology. So I think that would be my closing comment.
I think, and that holds completely true in this situation as well. I think that's what each of the businesses should leverage on as well. So we deeply thank you for joining the panel, and it was definitely a very fruitful session for all of us. So thank you so much for the audience out there. We are also working with many of the corporates very closely. So keep on following up on the program section on the Startup India website, and we'll keep on coming up with more such useful webinars. Thank you so much, William, Rohit, and Shruti, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.